Hello friends, I'm Tim Eggers. Welcome back to Highwheel Woodworks. Today we're going to talk about a panel glue up, which is one of the foundational elements and skill sets that most every woodworker needs to have. Examples of that would be, let's say we're making a small coffee table. We've got to glue up the elements for the top of that. Even if it's something as large as a big conference table, gluing up those joints and knowing how to do that panel glue up is important. What happens if you're making some kitchen cabinet doors and you need to do a panel glue up to that? So ultimately the opportunity to join boards together to make smaller boards into bigger pieces is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with these two pieces of cherry that we've got here. We've already got them milled down. They've been jointed on the face, jointed on an edge. We've run them through the planer. We've ripped them on the table saw so they're ready to go for the sizes that we need. The two joints in here are the ones that we're going to put together. Starting out with that, we're going to measure this out and figure out that if we've got enough room there to make about a 24-inch tabletop, and we're going to mark that in the middle here at, we've got 30 inches worth of material here. We're going to start off with marking our board in the center so we know where the center of our board is going to be. I'm going to line these up. I want to know where that center is because I've got more than enough material here to do that 24-inch table. I'm going to come 12 inches off of that center line on both sides. That way I know the parameters of my glue up. I know how long they're going to be, so I know where I can put my biscuits that we're going to put in. I'm going to just mark that as my very end of my board for our final product. That's going to be our end. Now, we're going to put biscuits in there, which are small wafers of wood that are going to help us with the alignment up and down of our product. So this is what a biscuit looks like. We've got to mark where we want to put those. So from our end piece here, from the end of our board, we've got to come in about 3 inches and mark where that first one can be. That'll sit there kind of like this. The slot that the machine cuts is about 3 inches wide. So we'll mark the center of that. We'll put a biscuit there. We'll put one on the center. We'll come down here to the end. We'll mark that one as well. So now we've got 3 places that we're going to put biscuits here. We're going to take and mark our board now. The last thing I like to do before I join them together is I like to mark one side of every joint with an I, the other with an O. And obviously, when you're working on your projects like this at home, you wouldn't be using a Sharpie because it's hard to sand off. You'd be using a pencil. But for this illustration, I want you to be able to see that, so we've marked it that way. What that I and an O mean are simply that when we're going to our joint here, where we're going next, on this joint, I'm going to put this face in toward the fence. When I'm doing this joint, I'm going to have this face out away from the fence. That way, if there's any deviation from perfect 90 degrees on the jointer, those surfaces and the angles that might come into play will offset each other and it'll make a perfectly flat joint. The last thing, again, like I want to do is I want to joint those because I want to get this joint here to be as invisible as I can get it to be. And you can see it's got a little margin for error in there. That's just from cutting it on the table saw. So join me next over at the jointer and we'll show you how we're going to joint these edges to make them perfectly smooth and make that joint disappear as much as we can. Okay, we're here at the jointer where we're going to take the seam that we're going to put together and run those 2 edges over the jointer. This one is going to be facing outside away from the fence. The way I want to do this is I'm going to take this hand facing up. It's going to push against the fence here. The back hand is going to be over the top of it. Notice that my forearm is parallel to the fence and my other one is pointing directly across. I've got to hold this board right straight up on that fence real well to get this nice and square. I'm going to run it through like this. When my hand has cleared the blade going through there, I'm going to just hold it in one specific spot. I'm going to push that board all the way through there. When it's done and clear and the guard closes back up again, then I can take it off and move to my other board. Here we go. So we've come back from our jointer. We've got this face against the fence, this face away from the fence, and look at the seam that we've got there. It's just about perfection, just about completely goes away. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our biscuit joiner, and on these three lines here we're going to put our biscuit slot in there. We've got our biscuit cutter set up for a depth of 20. That's the size of the biscuit that we're going to use. We've got the depth of our cut set here such that you can see that. It's about halfway down from the top of that board. It doesn't have to be right smack in the middle, but awful close if you can get it there. So that's a good one. We've got this set up at 90 degrees. We're going to turn this like this. We're going to come into that joint. We're going to put the face of our biscuit joiner right up next to the edge. Hold down on the top. Then we're simply going to pull the switch on it. We're going to dive it in there and make our biscuit slot. Each one of those marks get one. And then what we'll have here are three nice slots in there that our biscuit will go into. And what that's going to give us when we cut them on the other board as well, it's going to give us alignment up and down. So our top will be perfectly flat. Our reference is always going to be on the top side of the board. We're going to cut our other one here real quick. One of the things that matters a whole lot when you're cutting your biscuits in is take your time. Plunge it in there nice and slow and draw it back out. If you go too fast, the cutter can catch on there and it'll flip it out of that hole and can ruin your piece. So with that, we'll get the glue process going. We'll put these together and get them in clamps and we'll have a nice glue up done. So we've got our biscuit slots all cut in our boards. We've dry fit them to make sure they're lined up like they need to be. And then we've got them on our clamps here. We're going to go ahead and get our glue applied. I like to turn both surfaces up. Good old everyday tight bond 2 in a roller like this, puts it on there real nice. Always start out with the board that's furthest from you so you're not dragging your shirt sleeves or anything through fresh glue when it's going on your board. Some people will put the glue on with a glue bottle and run their finger over it to spread it out. Some people will use a glue brush or a flux brush to get it on. I just happen to like to use these rollers. It does a real nice job. Good old everyday tight bond 2, and there's enough from rolling it over that'll get into those slots where it'll apply a little bit of glue to our biscuits. The good thing about the tight bond or the typical wood glues is that they are pressure activated, so it's compression and pressure that causes them to catalyze and create their bond. It's not a matter of drying, it's a matter of the pressure creating that catalyzed bond. Lay these back over. Line them up. We're going to push them together. And I like to get my ends nice and straight. Get my clamps on there. I like to start at one end. And it doesn't take a whole lot of pressure. You don't have to get gorilla on it. But I like to get them nice and snug. And I'll alternate my clamps from the bottom of the board to the top of my board. Reason for that is if I push them all from one side, it tends to want to crown it up. So if I put clamps evenly spaced on both sides, it countermands that binding it up and causing it to bow. So there we've got that nice and tight. We're going to go all the way down here to the end, get our last one in order. And as you can see, what we want to have here is we want that glue to be compressed out of that joint. There's an old adage that says that the glue on your bench and the glue on the floor are what's going to hold your project together. And that simply alludes to the fact that if you've got enough to squeeze out top and bottom, you got enough glue in your joint. You don't want to have dry spots in there. We always put the handles on the one end, so when we take this off the bench, we can stand it up like this, and it'll lean up against the wall or up against another tool in the shop. One thing that's real important too is if you're going to use your workbench to do your glue up on, wax it. Put some paste wax on there every once in a while so the glue that drips out from our project isn't going to stick to the bench. What I like to do then is I'll take the time, and it's right here at 4 o'clock. I'll like to put the time on there that it went into the clamps. I know then how long I can leave it in there before I take it out. Typical on this is I'll take my glue ups and I'll do them late in the afternoon or early in the evening, so I'll let them sit overnight. If you have to pull them out earlier than that, I like to know how much time I've got on them. I have at times been in a real rush where I needed to get the project done in very, very short order, and I've had to take it out in as little as like 35 minutes. It stays nice and tight, but it doesn't cure until it sits there for a good couple hours. So mark your time on it so you know when it went into clamps, and then take it aside and set it somewhere in your shop undisturbed so it can sit there until you're ready to pull it out of clamps and use it. Some people will ask about the glue that's on the top or on the bottom side. That will dry and it'll be able to flake off. So if you let that sit about a half an hour, you can go back in there with a putty knife and scrape that excess glue off. Otherwise, you got to take a card scraper or a cabinet scraper and scrape it off the next day. But that gets us our basic panel glue up, and it doesn't matter if you're doing something small like this that could be a little desktop, or if you're doing a giant sized conference table. The process is still exactly the same. The size of the pieces are the only real difference. So go ahead and watch that a few times if you would, and go ahead and subscribe, and if you could, comment down below so we know what you got out of this process of doing a panel glue up.